Hey everybody, Lieutenant Joe here for Hope is Not a Tactic, the school safety and security show. Are you trying to keep your schools safe and secure in your facilities? Of course you are. All right, so let's cover my sponsors first that bring this information to you. We have riottint.com, medicalessentialdiagnostics.com, and blue360media.com. All three companies that care about your safety and security. Riot Tint makes safety and security film, amazing stuff. Take a look. Medical Essential helps you with your health if you're a state worker, town worker, municipal worker. And Blue 360 Media publishes everything to do with law enforcement and law, and soon everything to do with safety and security in our schools. All right, so I go over my list here, and I'm trying to think of, what are some tidbits you can use. So in a previous episode, I was talking about the Security Operations Center and tech, and I started talking about a talk I gave recently to a group of superintendents and principals and whatnot. And one of the things that we had talked about was making sure they comply with all their state laws. Now, this was interesting. There had to be 40 schools represented, and a year ago, there were new state laws implemented that every school had to have an all hazards threat, vulnerability, and risk assessment. They had to have a district-wide emergency plan, a special kind of emergency plan, and they had to train every employee in their district. And when I asked who has done these three things a year after the deadline, no one raised their hands. Right now, I know these things are time consuming. You're worrying about teaching, you're worried about your school, and it's expensive to get somebody to come in. But the reality is, you have to get these things done. So, an all hazards threat, vulnerability, and risk assessment, what's different about that is that it covers not just violence, all right? An internal threat, someone we let in our buildings, students, staff, delivery people, teachers, that kind of thing, or the external threat. Those are people who we don't let in and they try and break their way in to hurt us, right? So an all hazard looks at those are man-made kind of dangers, right? And that's what we've all been looking at. We've been looking at that with our equipment, our training, our lockdown drills, all that. The other side of threats that could hurt us are the natural disasters, things other than violence that people do. So some of those things, I did an assessment at a beautiful private school in California. And when I asked them, they wanted to do a tabletop drill for their upper leadership and for their security teams. And I said, what do you want to do it about? And they said, well, could we do something on landslides? Now, I'm from the Northeast. I know there are landslides in the world, but we don't have landslides in the Northeast. We have hurricanes here. And I said, okay, what else? And they said, well, these huge forest fires, they can come roaring over the hills and they threaten everybody. And I said, well, we have forest fires. I'm in Jersey. We got pine barren fires, but we don't have those kind of fires. California just had them, didn't they? In Los Angeles, burned out entire neighborhoods. I said, okay, that's good. What else? Earthquakes. We have earthquakes, and they could be very dangerous. So yes, does New Jersey had an earthquake in the last year? We did, and 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago we did, but they don't shake our buildings down like they do out west, California. So when I started to look at that, I said, okay, we ended up doing a really intense tabletop on what happens if a fire, one of those fires broke out and was raging towards the school during a school day. So we did a tabletop on, we got a call from emergency management who said this fire's coming. You have 2 hours to get 700 students off the campus and 10 miles away from the fire. You got to do that. Go. The clock is ticking now. And what was amazing is that this was a very high-end private school. They had resources. They had smart people. They had all kinds of good plans. The first thing that we did is when we did this tabletop, I said, well, what would we do? We got to get these 700 kids out here. Well, we'll put them on buses and bus them out of here. And I looked around. I said, you have a beautiful place here, multiple acres. I said, where do you keep your buses? And they said, well, we don't have buses. We have a bus company. I said, oh, is the bus company, can they get here in 2 hours with the buses to get these 700 kids out of here? I said, I don't know. We never asked them. I said, well, why don't somebody go make a call? So the point was, They found out a lot of things in that tabletop that they had to address. And it was great because, like I said, they're all professionals, they're all smart, and we made a list of the things we learned during our tabletop. But that was an all hazards threat, vulnerability, and risk assessment. Is that a hazard for them? A big fire? Yeah. Is an earthquake a hazard for them? Yes. Is a landslide for them? Yes, it is. And everywhere in the country, we have things we have to be concerned about that are unique to our geographic area. Right? So hurricanes can happen on the East Coast. We can have tremors. We can have floods. Right? We were hit with horrible floods this year. Right? So when you make your plans, your emergency operations plans, don't forget to include things like natural disasters. Do you have a nuclear plant close by? Well, not everybody does, but some of us do. Do you have a concern for that? Do you have what happens if the bridges went down? What happens if you had a horrible lightning storm? The other thing to consider is to look at things like what would you do if a gasoline tanker overturned a block from the school? Was potential explosive kind of a thing. What would you do if you had a threat on the school without somebody being at the door or in the building? You just get a threat. That's man-made again. But when we look at all hazards, that's what that means. Think of everything that could happen. You have an expected level of care to give to everybody in your building. Are you considering everything? And one of the best things you can do is run a drill. But if you don't want to do that, do a tabletop. A tabletop, this was so good for this school because they went through everything. Everyone got to pitch in and get to give their opinion, and they came up with a beautiful list of things they needed to work on to make their campus safer. So I'm going to suggest that to you. All right. So do me a favor, subscribe to this channel, will you please? We can do more and more. I have dozens and dozens of things I want to talk about here, and I know all the sponsors care about you just like I do. So pass this on to your superintendent, pass it on to all the teachers. Email me, Joe at Pangaro Training, Joe at Pangaro Training, and let me know what else you want to talk about. But in the meantime, like I said, I got 120 things over here that we talk about. So an all hazards threat, vulnerability, and risk assessment is man-made problems, active shooters, violence, things like that, and then natural disasters that could strike your area. Are you prepared for all of them? Is your staff prepared? All right. Remember, be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. This is Lieutenant Joe for Hope is not a tactic.